1770s in early America, there had been many demonstrations and protests against the British by this point in time, and it wasn't actually the hardship that it incurred on the American people over the Stamp Act and the tariffs on molasses and some other goods that infuriated the Americans, but it was actually taxation without representation. Probably sometime back in early school, middle school or somewhere like that, you probably heard that expressed. But it was the taxation without representation, which actually violated the English Constitution, that so infuriated the Americans. But when the British actually passed an act of Parliament that gave one company, the English East India Company, an exclusive monopoly on the sale of tea in America, this really infuriated the Americans, and especially the residents of Boston. So on February 16th of 1773, 3 groups of Boston residents dressed up as Mohawk Indians and boarded 3 English ships and threw 92,000 pounds of tea into the Boston harbor. And after this, the British, of course, took steps to crush some of the demonstrations and revolutionary protest and so forth. But it was actually after this time that Thomas Paine came to America. In September of 1774, actually, that's when the first Congressional Congress was formed in America, in Pennsylvania. And that included representatives from all 13 of the colonies. And it was in October of 1774 that Thomas Paine actually came to America. And if you remember from my previous speech, he had some urging from Benjamin Franklin. So that's when he came to America, and he was named the editor of a magazine called the Pennsylvanian magazine. But after a dispute with the owner of the magazine, he had a falling out, and so he began to write a series of essays, which was published in a book in January of 1776. And that book was Common Sense. I would encourage all of you to read it, but today I'm going to talk about this speech and present to you Thomas Paine's presentation on the quest for independence in America, because he did make a strong argument. The first copy of the book sold about 100,000 copies. Of course, it obviously went over big with Americans. But the second printing of the book sold over 250,000 copies, and it's estimated that it was read in at least most homes in America, and it was well studied throughout America and had a great deal of influence on both the Declaration of Independence and the Revolution. So I'm going to quickly go through the book, and of course time doesn't allow me to make a very complete book report of this book, but I'm going to cover some of the main points of what Thomas Paine covered in regards to common sense and rejecting the British monarchy. As you can see from the cover, it has an X through the crown. He rejected the British monarchy and also made his case for American independence. So first of all, Thomas Paine, he stresses in the book, to begin with, that he is not affiliated with any political party. He absolutely denounces any connection with a political party. And then he explains in very simple terms the reason for government and the contrast between society and government. As a matter of fact, he says that society is, in every case, a blessing. But government, in its very best case, is only a necessary evil. But in its worst case, it's an intolerable one. So he didn't have a lot of good things to say about government in general. And then he goes on to explain what's wrong with the monarchy in no uncertain terms. As a matter of fact, he explains that the monarchy originated as among the heathens. And I'm going to give you just one quote on that quickly. Government by kings was first introduced into the world by the heathens, from whom the children of Israel copied the custom. It was the most prosperous invention the devil ever set foot for to promote idolatry. The heathens paid divine honors to their deceased kings. And the Christian world has improved on the plan by doing this same honor to living ones. So that's what he had to say about the monarchy. He wasn't exactly in favor of the monarchy, in other words, the kings and the queens, and especially King George. And then he continues to make his case in going on to criticize the English Constitution. And he declares that it was written back during the Dark Ages, but it had too many flaws for it to be a valid document for us today, and especially for Americans. But to continue his case in favor of independence, he explains the benefits of independence for America, for the colonies. And some of those benefits involve things that actually do just make common sense. For instance, he mentions the possibility of free trade for America if we were independent of the British, and certainly makes a valid case for that. But also he illustrates that America, if we were independent from the British, that we wouldn't be drawn into their wars, especially with France and Spain. So we would have that sort of, you might say, handicap eliminated in that way. And he makes a good case for that. And then he also includes the business of trade wars that England was involved in for one reason or another, that America would not be involved in those trade wars, and in other words, we would have free trade throughout the world, which was another good case for reasons why America should be independent. So he gives all of these different cases, but he follows that up with illustrations of some of the problems of the British Navy. And whereas the British Navy had ships all over the world and had a famous reputation of being such a powerful navy, he makes the point that at any one time, if Britain had to call on its ships and use its ships to go to someplace like America or to fight a war, that only 10% of the ships would actually be available. And so this is another case that he makes. And then he does make a case for a declaration of independence, actually. He does make that case. And in making that case, he gives 4 reasons why America should declare its independence. And one of them is to enable other countries to mediate the conflicts between England and America. The second one was to seek assistance from France and Spain, which he felt would be willing to give assistance to America if we were to declare our independence. The third one was to avoid being considered rebels, as long as we were tied in with England, if we had a dispute with England, we were considered rebels. If we declared our independence, we would not be rebels. And the third one, or the fourth one, I should say, was to open America to free trade. So you can see that Thomas Paine did make a statement in favor of independence for Americans.